Starting my speech in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Corruption is corruption when we find out that is a corruption. Corruption exists because two things, right? Number one, politicians or those who sit in power, they see a chance to do it. So they do the corruptions. Or second is that in terms of power abuse. When, for example, they're being elected and somehow they use the trust of the people to abuse that power. And second is that how then they sit in the power, most of the cases, the hierarchy of the power, they create the system, they work within the system, they cover the corruptions by overshadowing the system. So at the end of the day, corruptions happen subliminally. To call out this corruption, it takes time, investigation, and stamina and resources, ladies and gentlemen. To that idea, we think that it will be very important to impoverish corruptors as far as we concern that the amount of money are very important for the developing nations as a whole. So in terms of mechanism, we're going to a little bit nuanced with the OGs, right? We're going to take in the assets, of course, of how much their corruption is, no matter small or the big one. It also happens to the manifestation of their corruptions. It looks like, for example, when they make a business and how then the business comes from the money and so on, or the housing or the property ownership or car. We think that at the end of the day, of the assets. However, there's a difference here about how then we're going to only targeting to the personal ownership. But how then we're going to differentiate this, right? We're going to have investigations. We're going to separate the personal ownership with the family relatives ownership. So we're going to make sure whether we're going to impoverish the corruptors solely, not the family as a whole, by using the qualified persons, of course, and how then we have the data, the finance data, the purchasing data, and so on. As a whole nations, we have those issues as the systems works itself. And then those money then will be returned into the state's necessity. For example, to fulfill the social welfare, to support the progressive projects such as empowerment and education and so on. Because we as a nation agree that the money become the essential tools to operate programs, to operate or fulfill state's necessity. This is also a response to all cases when they somehow assume that it is a very hard to measure personal financial agency, because we think at the end of the day we can measure it. We're going to talk about three things. One, why corruption is morally evil. Second, we're going to talk about how then money, how that we should create better public opinion. And lastly, if I have more time, money as a political capital. Number one, why we think corruption is morally evil? Because most of the cases, those who conduct corruption are those who sit in power. This looks like a politician. Looks like when they are already rich, they are already well educated, but they still conduct corruptions. This is shows to you as well that the notion from the opposition, by taking the root notions that they will teach persons to not conduct corruption, or how then they're going to somehow brief this politicians to not conduct corruption is not effective enough, because these persons is aware enough that corruption is a harmful and very is a harmful things to do. However, as a nation is that why we think corruption is a very harmful right. Number one, because nations keeping the pace with the limited budget of spending, especially when we're talking about developing country. When we developing country, we have a limited resources, so the amount of the budget is very limited. Even in the context of developed countries, right? Within the developed countries should measure about how much their spending is, how then they're going to manifest the spending is. Then the corruption, and when the corruption cases exist, this harm impact these issues, because when the money's been taken, the consequences is that either we should request more money or we're using the insufficient amount of money, which then leads into bad quality of implementations of the program, such as the infrastructure with the bad quality of infrastructure itself. We think that at the end of the day, this shows how morally evil the corruption is. For example, the case of Julian Peter Batubara, even in the middle of the COVID-19, the Bansos case itself took self-interest and neglect the necessity of the society. We're going to also respond several cases from the OOs, right? When it comes to the idea that impoverished will impact the family, we think that this is not untrue, because most of the cases, those persons precisely hiding their corruptions because they're aware enough it's shameful. And second is that most of the cases, family aware enough corruption is a bad and morally evil. Even family relatives will not justify about how then the corruption case exists, right? But second is that how then, even when we impoverish this issue, why they still can be functional society. Because most of the cases, this person is a well-educated person, hard-skilled persons. When we're talking about survivability, they have the ability to survive. Moreover, we need to be bold, right? By impoverished doesn't necessarily mean we're going to ban them from works, right? We let the society to decide whether they're going to, for example, giving the chance to these politicians and so on. Because we acknowledge the fact that they are skillful, they have certain knowledge and so on. If the society agree to put them in certain positions, then why not? But second is that we're going to talking about how then we're going to create a better public opinion, because you need to understand about corruptions. Corruption leads into the downside of a democracy, about people have no trust in the government itself. This leads into the less participation in elections, when people don't even trust the government. This leads into as well, for example, how we are very hard to implement the program. When we impoverish corruptions, we create the notions that we against corruption and we have the money back. And how then the money can be manifest into the society back? Because most of the cases, the resources of the money sources from the taxpayers of the societies, right? Imagine in the world when corruption exists, that these politicians taking the people's money. We create the language that we give back to the societies, right? This will regain the trust from the society. But last is though, why we think impoverished will struck down the political power of these corruptors? Because most of the cases, corruptors come to politicians, and when you want to be a politician, you need lots of capitals, right? For example, even in the small measure, if you want to conduct a political campaign, you need 6 million rupiah, right? 6 billion rupiah. This shows you that to be politicians is a very expensive thing. So when we impoverish the corruptors, we're going to send the message that if you really want to be a politician or those who sit in power, you should be someone who is very credible and very responsibility in terms of how then you're going to use your power. So you're not going to abuse your power as well. Under that ideas, as a CZ, we're very proud to propose the motions to impoverish the corruptors. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.